With all the stories making the headlines now this Tuesday night, it's the ITV News at 10.
The Prime Minister wrote himself into the history books today, but not in the way he would have wanted. Boris Johnson became the first PM in British history to be penalised for breaking the law over at least one of the parties he is said to have attended during lockdown. He was, he said, very sorry.
I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public, and I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better.
The Chancellor was also issued with a fine and also offered an unreserved apology. So that, their allies say, is that the end of the matter. Move along, please. But is it? On News at 10. A resounding silence from many Tory MPs. Anushka takes the temperature of the party tonight. If only we had broken the rules, those denied the chance to see dying loved ones explain why they will neither forgive nor forget.
If he had an ounce of moral fibre, which I'm sad to say I don't think he does, then he would resign.
In other news, has Vladimir Putin used chemical weapons in Ukraine? And if he has, what will the world's response be? The Chinese leadership eases lockdown in Shanghai after protests escalated, but 20 million are still confined, and...
So we're going to play a humiliating trick on Hitler.
The real-life spy plot that fooled the Nazis by the man who created James Bond.
It's an incredible story. I mean, it's sort of bonkers.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening from a Downing Street which turns out to have been quite the lockdown party venue. Who knew? If they perhaps should have done at the time, you can probably hear someone is attempting to emulate the party venue tonight as we speak. But if the police should have known at the time, perhaps they certainly do now. They've issued 50 fines and counting, including ones today to the Prime Minister, his wife and the Chancellor. This makes Boris Johnson the first Prime Minister in history to have been found to have broken the law, his very own law at that, which is perhaps not quite the write-up he was looking for. The lockdown party in question was said to have involved a birthday cake and then to have been merely a brief birthday celebration without cake. Whichever, it may have been the first fine a Prime Minister has received, it won't necessarily be the last. And for all those not able to see loved ones even as they were dying, it is very tough to take. Asked if he was going to resign, Mr. Johnson hesitated slightly, as we'll see. Then said he wanted to carry on delivering for the British people. The question perhaps tonight, though, is this the end of the affair or merely the start of a whole new chapter?
I just wish I could have been there to hold her hand.
I look at my memories of my mum and I cry, because they're not happy memories. He's robbed me of that.
I should have banged that door down in the hospital and said I'm seeing my husband because they broke the rules and got away with it.
It is now a fact. Through their pain, our leaders partied. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor, making the laws and breaking the laws, all in the same building.
Today I've apology, and I have to say, in all frankness, at that time, it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. But of course, the police have found otherwise, and I fully respect the outcome of their investigation.
The first accusations about a party in Number 10 emerged on the 30th of November last year. The next day, Boris Johnson told Parliament no rules had been broken.
All guidance was followed completely.
Then, 6 days later, ITV broadcast footage showing staff laughing about that party.
This fictional party was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
The next day, the Prime Minister repeated his denials.
I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken.
Then on the 10th of January, we revealed this email inviting staff to drinks in the number 10 garden, including the Prime Minister. 2 days later, he said he hadn't realised it was a party.
I believed implicitly that this was a work event.
The denials continued until the 31st of January, when Sue Gray published part of her report, concluding that parties amounted to failures of leadership and judgment. And today, the Metropolitan Police confirmed the Prime Minister, his wife and the Chancellor will receive fines.
Happy birthday to you.
For a birthday party, Boris Johnson was given on the 19th of June 2020, revealed by ITV News earlier this year, in which he received another cake in the Cabinet Room, with his wife and the Chancellor joining the gathering. Tonight, Rishi Sunak said in a statement, "I offer an unreserved apology. I understand that for figures in public office, the rules must be applied stringently in order to maintain public confidence. I respect the decision that has been made and have paid the fine."
They've dishonoured their office. This is the first time in the history of our country that a Prime Minister has been found to be in breach of the law. And then he lied repeatedly to the public about it. Britain deserves better. They have to go.
But when the Prime Minister is dealing with war in Ukraine, few Conservatives now want war in his own party and have become more willing to defend him.
He, at the time, didn't think he was breaking the rules because he was meeting with people at these so-called parties, people he'd been working with cheek by jowl throughout the week anyway.
But if he was at the party, surely he knew the rules were being broken.
When is a party a party? And by that I mean
wine and cheese and beer and music and dancing, that's a party.
I don't think there was any music or dancing.
But others enjoyed far less than that.
I couldn't pay my respects to her body. I wasn't allowed.
Sylvia Jackson died from COVID in her care home without her daughter or any other family.
There was a time not so long ago when being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was something great. It's an absolute shame and a disgrace. And if he had an ounce of moral fibre, which I'm sad to say I don't think he does, then he would resign.
Tonight, Boris Johnson is at his country residence Chequers, a secluded spot for a partying Prime Minister whose law-breaking he can no longer hide. Paul Brand, News at 10.
Now, if news of the fines for the Johnson and Mr Sunak had come 3 months ago, their survival in Downing Street, number 10 and number 11, might have been considerably more in question. But Tory MPs do seem to have been generally impressed with Mr Johnson's handling of the war in Ukraine, which is, of course, a matter of the utmost gravity. Ultimately, though, this will all depend on what we, the public, think, particularly if there are more fines or if the Sue Gray report, when published in full, makes for damning reading. If nothing else, the Tory party has always been ruthless in its treatment of leaders who seem likely to fail in an upcoming election. Anushka tonight takes the temperature then of Tory MPs.
3 months ago, the Prime Minister had to issue an apology to the Queen because of parties inside Downing Street. A scandal that meant a number of Conservative MPs thought he should go. But a lot has changed since then. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and Boris Johnson's response to it has shifted the mood of his political party, with even fierce critics supporting the PM.
Now is absolutely not the time to destabilise the government, a government that's actually leading the international coalition against Putin. And I will not say or do anything that will give one crumb of comfort to the man who is creating war crimes in Ukraine.
Newer MP Brendan Clark-Smith insisted this wasn't a resigning matter.
Liam Byrne got a fixed penalty notice for using his mobile phone while driving. Harriet Harman had a driving ban. I think you have to put it in context. All of those people apologised, and quite rightly so. None of those people resigned.
I mean, isn't the big difference here that we're talking about the Prime Minister breaking rules that he had just put in place to get the country through a pandemic?
A lot of us made sacrifices for that, but I think with COVID, I think with the the rules, the regulations that we brought in. There were always those grey areas.
There was a similar mood in the WhatsApp messages arriving from other MPs. I don't think plunging into a leadership election bearing in mind current environment would be the responsible thing to do, said one. Honestly, I think the moment of danger has passed. It might be all different if there was a successor in the wings and no war, said another. But some were clearly angry. It's as if we've walked through the mirror into a new age of politics where everything goes. A cabinet source said to me that there could still be risky moments ahead for the Prime Minister if momentum were to build up among MPs. I'm told that the WhatsApp groups are very quiet today, but they'll be back here on Tuesday talking about all of this. And finally, when we get the full version of the Sue Gray report that I've heard could be damning. But some think the PM should go now.
I do believe if standards in British politics are going to mean anything, they have both breached the ministerial code by knowingly misleading the House of Commons, then they should resign.
But that would need to be demanded by Conservative MPs, and the mood of the party isn't there tonight. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
And Robert joins me here in Downing Street to talk about all this, where we feel like we're in the worst karaoke party ever. The music,
even worse than the one that happened in Downing Street.
Yeah, the music, just in case you're wondering, is You Have to Fight for Your Right to Party with stunning originality. Anyway, let's move on to the substance of this, because it is an important day. It seems clear that the Prime Minister is not under threat tonight, but this won't necessarily be the end of the matter.
No, it's definitely not the last word on any of this. I was talking to an official who attended Downing Street parties, and this person said to me that it was extraordinary that the Prime Minister had been fined for the birthday cake party because...
Well, not the cake party, but anyway, that's a whole nother separate question. But yes, anyway, sorry, carry on.
But, you know, because there were other events that he has attended that this person says were much more obviously unlawful. And so, yes, I think it's very likely the police are going to levy more fines on the Prime Minister. He's going to say again that he didn't know he was breaking the rules. But I think that becomes less and less plausible if those fines mount up. But the mood of the Tory party, and I've talked to his most, I suppose, acute critics, is they're not going to get rid of him. I think I'm beginning to wonder what on earth could be revealed that would persuade the Tory party to force him out. The Sue Gray report, which will eventually be published, is going to be incredibly damaging for confidence in Downing Street and him personally. I don't expect him to go even after that. And we need to consider what this really means. What we have discovered today is that the Prime Minister broke the criminal law. He broke a law that he himself wrote. It was a law that millions of British people thought were incredibly onerous and followed. And yet his own party doesn't think it's a reason to push him out, and he feels under no obligation to resign. And there's another point, which is he said to MPs that there were no rule-breaking parties in Number 10. He said to MPs that the COVID rules were not broken. Now, it's perfectly clear that MPs were misled, and he doesn't even feel under an obligation tonight to explain how he got it wrong. He says he was reassured he wasn't breaking the rules. Well, who reassured him? Tell us that. So I do think this is an incredibly big moment. It's a big moment largely for this reason. The ministerial code, which he signed when he became Prime Minister, says all ministers, including the Prime Minister, have to be honest more than anything else, and they must never lie to MPs. There are many people who say that he broke those fundamental principles and he is not resigning. It's a big, and many would say really damaging moment for the British Constitution, for those things that we pride in our democracy.
OK. Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, Conservative MPs who are holding their fire for now are back in their constituencies for Easter. If they're out and about over the holiday, they won't be short of advice, whether it is about moving on or remembering the final days of loved ones who died alone while politicians and their staff party.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
This was one of the last celebrations Sheila Lamb would enjoy with her family. She died alone in a care home from COVID almost exactly 2 years ago.
She was an incredibly caring woman, such a character. She had so much integrity.
Her grandson Amos followed the rules about not visiting and says the family still haven't been able to grieve properly.
The thought of people partying left, right and centre is just an insult to everything that we've been through. And that's why we'll never forget what they were doing, and we won't forgive them.
What would you say to Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak?
I'd say they should finally do the right thing, take responsibility and resign.
And in the Prime Minister's constituency of Uxbridge, people were in no doubt that his actions have undermined his leadership.
He's not a leader because you can't follow somebody who's doing the wrong thing.
He should be setting the example and modelling good behaviour. It just seems wrong.
But while the Prime Minister is unlikely to lose his seat, in the marginal town of Middleton, the Conservatives have a majority of just 600 votes. And some locals here are a bit fed up. Does it change your opinion of Boris Johnson?
To be honest, I did like him in the beginning, but to be fair, he kind of let us down. I don't particularly like him anymore.
Because of this?
Yeah, so he won't be getting my vote again.
He's doing a difficult job.
Doesn't change your mind about him?
Not really, no.
Do you like him?
He's okay, he's Boris.
I think people's opinions are already set wrong before now. I think it's a big embarrassment, it's a big shame. It just kind of tells exactly what the Conservative Party generally is.
She's a jolly good fellow. And across the country there are thousands of families who still find their loss and their sacrifice hard to contemplate, and the actions of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor even harder to understand. Hannah Miller, News at 10.
Well, let's move on to Ukraine now, and claims that Russia has dropped chemical weapons on the besieged port city of Mariupol have been investigated, but not tonight confirmed. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister says they could have been phosphorus bombs, still horrendous, but not actually classed as chemical weapons. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says the United States can't confirm either way, but he pointed out his country has been warning since before the invasion that Russia would use chemical weapons.
This is the 48th day of siege in the port city of Mariupol. Conventional bombs and bullets have done this damage. Now Ukrainian fighters here allege they were attacked with chemical weapons. Footage taken by Ukrainians defending this city purports to show victims of an unknown noxious substance.
I could hardly breathe and immediately felt dizzy. My legs gave way.
The allegation of a chemical attack in Mariupol cannot yet be verified, but what we know is Ukrainian fighters are surrounded at this factory, the Azovstal Iron and Steel Works. This is the base for the Azov Battalion resisting Putin's advance, and ITV News has today been able to speak to one of their volunteers still fighting on here, and he tells us what he saw.
The enemy dropped the canisters with some kind of aerosol chemical, and it was like a cloud of fog or something like a cloud of smoke.
What are the symptoms?
Difficult breathing, but people were fainting. I may assume that Russians can use this again because they hate us so much. And we're still standing, and we will stand until we have our weapon in our arms and until we're breathing.
Russian state-controlled TV has released these images of Mariupol's destruction, but Russian-backed separatists have been openly talking up a chemical attack on the Ukrainian resistance.
We should ask for chemical units who will find a way to smoke those moles out of their holes.
The separatists deny a chemical attack, but this city is still under constant bombardment, meaning independent investigators can't get anywhere near to examine the evidence.
They are sure of their impunity. They are sure that it can turn out that the world will forget this for them, that Europe will forget this, because Europe's complaints can just be brushed aside.
It took Russia's retreat to uncover the full scale of atrocities around Kyiv, but in eastern Ukraine, Putin is still sending reinforcements. The world can only guess at the horrors hidden in the besieged city of Mariupol. Peter Smith, News at 10 in Ukraine.
Well, just in case anyone thought any different, Russia's President Putin has made clear there will be no let-up in what he calls the military operation in Ukraine, otherwise known as a mass international crime scene. It will keep going, he said, until all its objectives have been fulfilled. He explained away why his forces are moving so slowly, or tried to minimise losses amongst his own troops, he said.
3,500 miles from Moscow, Vladimir Putin flew to Russia's Far East today, visiting a space centre with his closest ally, the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Here he defended his country's actions in Ukraine. We are helping, he said, saving people on one hand, and on the other taking measures to provide security for Russia itself. It's obvious we didn't have any other choice. This is the right decision. And, he said, peace talks had reached a dead end. His visit marks the anniversary of Russia sending the first man into space. Mr. Putin, ever proud of the Soviet Union, said they'd done that despite Western sanctions. But the world has moved on, and so has Russia. There are people, especially amongst the young, who oppose what their government is doing in Ukraine and are brave enough to say so.
It violates all norms of international law, and I'm totally against it.
Are you worried about what speaking out like this might mean for you?
But I was afraid for too long, and I think now we should speak up, Russians, because we somehow isolated in the world, and I think the world should know that there are many Russians who are against this.
But in truth, there are even more Russians who support it. The Ukrainians betrayed us, he says. They sold out to the Americans so the Americans could put their weapons near our borders. Even Russia's last remaining independent polling company says the conflict has increased the percentage who say they support Putin.
October last year it was about 63, something like this. So already with the escalation started, the rating was going up, but it went up considerably during March. End of March, we had about 83% support.
So there is little sign that domestic pressure will make Mr. Putin change course. However isolated he and his friends are looking on the global stage. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Moscow.
And Robert joins us from Washington to talk about all this. Robert, many of our viewers will remember Syria, President Obama saying the use of chemical weapons was a red line. He didn't end up doing anything really when they were used. I know we don't know that they were used here, but if this administration were to escalate on this or any other subject, what would escalation look like?
You're right, there's extreme caution here tonight in how the US is categorizing this potential use of chemical weapons. They're refusing to suggest that chemical weapons have indeed been used, although the US Secretary of State Tony Blinken did suggest that America might be contemplating using sort of conventional riot control tear gas and mixing it with chemical agents in order to create some sort of battlefield confusion and potentially making it very difficult for Washington to calibrate an appropriate response. Certainly there is here a fraught debate and no consensus on how they would respond to a chemical or weapon attack by Moscow. Remember, Tom, many of the national security team in the White House now are veterans of the Obama administration. They are deeply haunted by the 2012 incident in where the president warned Damascus not to use chemical weapons. President Assad did use them. There was no adequate response from Washington, and it's widely judged to have shredded American credibility. So they don't want a repeat of that. If anything, there is now a sort of studied ambiguity. They don't want to overpromise to the Ukrainians and then find they're under-delivering.
Well, Robert, thank you very much indeed. And I've been talking to Robert and our Europe editor James Mates off the back of our special News at 10 last night about war crimes for our What You Need to Know podcast. We discussed many massacres and horrible things that both Robert and James have covered over the years, and we looked at their reference and their relevance to what's happening in Russia. So do listen off our website or from where you get your usual podcasts. Now, for more than a fortnight, the 26 million people who live in Shanghai have been confined to their homes in China's biggest citywide lockdown since Wuhan 2 years ago. They haven't been able to go to the supermarket or even collect medicines. Well, today, after sustained protest, that lockdown was lifted for 6.5 million people in 7,000 communities. At least they'll be allowed out of their homes, if not their neighborhoods. But that leaves nearly 20 million still in effect locked up, with anger mounting.
The first graduates left quarantine hell in Shanghai with certificates stating they are officially COVID-free. With one last disinfection for this little girl, she and her mother were among the thousands loaded onto buses and waved off by staff at one of the huge isolation facilities. They were released as the authorities started a phased reopening of the city, despite case numbers still being at record levels. The government has faced unprecedented protests for its handling of this outbreak. This was people shouting, "We are starving, we have no food," as an official visited their community. Health ministers today forced to defend the strict measures of a zero-COVID policy.
If we find mild cases or asymptomatic cases, we will try our best to send those people to a designated quarantine facility for observation.
There are millions who have now been confined to their homes for more than a month. Many with a swelling anger and growing hunger due to a continued delay in supplies. Harvey G has been supported by thousands after he launched a petition calling the government's policy inhumane.
The usually polite and orderly Shanghai people have become like mobs fighting over food.
Part of his plea to the president was to reveal the true death toll. There have been just 7 deaths reported.
There are normally 7,000 surgeries a day in Shanghai, but in lockdown it is impossible for them to proceed. How many of these people will die because they didn't get surgery in time?
There is no official Freedom Day offering people in Shanghai an end in sight. It will be next month before all of the lockdowns are lifted. This city having suffered for a policy pursued at all costs. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Beijing.
Now, in the Second World War, Operation Mincemeat was the code name for the Allied invasion of the Nazi-held island of Sicily. It relied on a plot by a rear admiral in naval intelligence and his young personal assistant, a certain Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. He, of course, made a career writing about improbable plots. This one involved planting fake documents on the body of a homeless man dressed in a Royal Marine captain's uniform. Sounds like the script for a film, doesn't it? Or even 2. A new one is out this week.
It was a plan so outrageous that the enemy might actually believe it.
The plan is highly implausible. So when can it be ready?
A masterstroke of deception that persuaded the German army the Allies weren't heading to Sicily.
A corpse will wash up on shore bearing classified letters.
A corpse carrying fake documents.
The Nazis bought it. And Operation Mincemeat saw them prepare to defend Greece while Allied soldiers invaded Sicily.
This is it, or this is a copy?
One of the copies from the time.
Inside the cabinet war rooms, 2 of the film's stars are shown the top-secret documents that outlined the outlandish plan.
It's an incredible story. I mean, it's sort of bonkers. It's the most audacious, ingenious deception plot. So if it was presented as fiction, you go, I think it's a bit over the top, really.
Like, this film shows this was all happening in a basement somewhere, while all the sort of action that we're used to seeing on film is happening elsewhere.
No stranger to wild plot lines, the story includes one Ian Fleming. The creator of James Bond was a naval intelligence officer who worked on the operation.
The people who did this never expected recognition for it, even though they knew they were
absolutely pivotal to the war effort. So I think it is a different sort of war story in that way.
Russia is tomorrow's war. The Nazis are expecting a deception.
The filmmakers are clear this was shot before the conflict in Ukraine, but they say there are parallels in any war story.
It's certainly true that disinformation and the control of competing narratives, it is absolutely front and centre in what's going on now.
Truth is, as they say, sometimes stranger than fiction. This story is a testament to just that. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10.
Now we will end as we began tonight with the man who broke so many of these lockdown party stories, Paul, of course. Paul, what's your own reflection on tonight, where we've come and what it means?
Well, Tom, this is the first time a British Prime Minister has been found to have broken the law, but it may not be the last. There may well be more fines for Boris Johnson. This story has plenty more yet to run. We know the police are working kind of methodically through party by party. They've issued fines for the party on the eve of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, for example. Today was all about the Prime Minister's birthday party. We know that's just one of 6 parties the Prime Minister is believed to have attended, though, so this story is by no means over, but it is extraordinary to think how far we've come this evening. When you look back at early December, the Prime Minister was saying no rules were broken, the Metropolitan Police were showing no interest whatsoever in investigating, and it was only when we broadcast that footage of Downing Street staff laughing and joking about a party that the Prime Minister then launched that internal inquiry that led to a police investigation. Tonight he looks pretty safe as Prime Minister. I don't think this is going to end his premiership, but it almost certainly will help to define it.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Now, it has been quite a day, as Paul said. It's been a long journey to get here, but as we close off tonight, the karaoke outside in the street is over, noisy as it was, but the Prime Minister is very much inside number 10 tonight. But for now, good night. Thanks for watching.
It was the birthday party.